All 3 episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com, and to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
For quite some time right now. You know, I always start a little early. We, unfortunately for the park, we had our librarian, John Heiser, retired a couple years ago. And I saw John the other day in this very room, and I want you to know that I see a few people around here that I don't think should have retired. When I look at John Heiser, he seems pretty happy. to be away from that library right there. But when we lost John Heiser, that obviously left a huge void, a gap, which is still going on with the library, a vacuum, if you will. And we have not been able to backfill that. The only thing that has kept our research in our library, what few books that we have gotten put up, say 20 or 30 that we've added in a couple of years, is a volunteer named Tom Green. He comes here at least one day a week, if not 2 days a week, and generally stays 4 to 5 hours, and then takes that work home. You know, when you get the bibliophiles, you know, you're done messing with different people. But more on that in just a minute. He takes the work home, and he does the work from his home computer. Now, about, I don't know, a couple of years ago, about the time that John retired, or shortly thereafter, my boss, Chris Gwynn, who's the filmmaker over here, have y'all enjoyed the winter lectures as much as I thought around? My evaluation's coming next week. Oh, Chris is a great guy. We get along fine as long as we don't talk about history. We get along just fine. Who would ever believe a Massachusetts man and a Mississippi man would have difference?
Sounds like a sitcom.
Chris, yeah, it could be. What would we call it? Chris came to me, and he had this idea that he wanted to take, this was back when the monuments first started coming down, 2 to 3 years, probably a year into this project. Y'all come on in, I hadn't even started. Chris wanted all of the correspondence and documents or whatever minutia that went into the erection of the Confederate monuments on the battlefield of Gettysburg. He wanted to make that accessible to the public. And so, you know, he came to me, which I was not very hot on the idea. For various reasons. I mean, historically and professionally, because I know nothing, professionally speaking. I don't know anything about web design or all this stuff. And anyway, we're just sitting there, and he's telling me this is what I'm about to do. And I says, well, okay. So I sat there in the chair in his office. I says, well, where's the documents? Well, I don't have the documents. I'll go, well, that's interesting. Well, where would I find the documents? You know, you need to find these documents. He turned to me, and he says, you just need to go find Tom. I says, Tom, you mean that volunteer down in the library? Tom. He's still with us. And he goes, yeah, Tom will be the man that you need to go to see. And that, ladies and gentlemen, set in motion a partnership, if you will, where I went and I started working with Tom Grady to get these Confederate monument documents ready to go online. And I'll speak in computer speak because some of you can actually understand this, but I didn't know what OCR meant before I met Tom Grady. I didn't know how to convert, and I can only say I did now, but I didn't know you could convert a Word document into PDF, right? I didn't know that you could, that if you converted a document to PDF, you could therefore search it et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we went through, I could sit here for the next 30 minutes and tell you about how many setbacks we had in this project. Oh, and then, by the way, we're about halfway through it. Chris comes to me and says, oh, by the way, we need to transcribe it because it's got to be accessible to the visually impaired. And I'm like, you got to be kidding. So now we've not only physically got to take the document, but somebody has to physically sit there and type all this out. That was not Tom Green. It was me and a bunch of the other seasonals, a few volunteers in there too, that did the heavy lifting on that. But Chris Gwynn, we drug down, and Chris Gwynn finally put his weight behind this project. Meaning he went down to these people who could care less what I said, and he told them that they needed to get this work finished. Come on in. And we finished it. And now it's ready to be posted. We put in Tom Green for this, and he really should have been put in, but they don't have an award for this for keeping the library going. But Chris and I put him in for an award based on his work that was there, that he had done on that. And this is for, I'll read it to you. This is from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, who was basically in charge of our, y'all come on in, it's not going to hurt. Is in charge of our region. The Park Service is in like 5 or 6 regions. And this is the letter that we call it, the regional office wrote us. Dear Mr. Greedy, it is my great pleasure to congratulate you on receiving the we won't mention, the 1867 George and Helen Hartzog Award, and this is all in bold, George and Helen Hartzog Award for Outstanding Volunteer Service, the Individual Volunteer Award for the Interior Region 1 of the National Park Service. Your volunteer service to Gettysburg National Military Park exemplifies the grit, dedication, and heart advocated by George B. Hartzog. If you don't know who George Hartzog is, he's one of the founders of the National Park Service. Their buildings, our big training centers are in Hartzog, and what's the other guy's name? Albright are there. Yes. Who she was active in there. Well, there you go. It's funny you mentioned that. This award was created in honor of Director Hartzog, who led the National Park Service from 1964 to 1972. He recognized the need to make it easier for citizens to donate their time and talents and advocated for legislation to create the Volunteers in Park program. After his retirement, George and his wife Helen supported the VIP program with a generous donation to the National Park Foundation. This fund is still used to honor exceptional volunteers, groups, and VIP programs. Your exceptional hard work, dedication, and attention to detail at Gettysburg National Military Park has benefited park staff and visitors alike. In particular, your efforts to transcribe monument archival materials and build a searchable database go above and beyond to help Gettysburg advance the NPS mission of preservation and education. The National Park Service appreciates the time and care you have devoted to the park. Thank you for your service. Sincerely, Gay Vitsky. Don't want to mispronounce her name, who is the regional director of the National Park Service. So, having said that, they sent.
You really have one?
I really have one. Poor Tom has been waiting for 6 months to get this, ladies and gentlemen. This is, there it says, the George and Helen Hartzog Award. I'll be right back for the picture. For Outstanding Volunteer Service, Interior Region 1. And it says on the bottom, I don't get my fingerprints on, but I already have. Outstanding Individual Volunteer, Thomas Greeny, Gettysburg National Military Park. How about a round of applause? let me put it back in the box for you, and I'll give you your letter now.
Yeah, I don't know.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you to the interpretive services for their support as well. And Matt, well, he's a handful.
Well, I'll tell you something.
What you need, and he helps me get off track.
Tom.
Frankly, when I need it most, but I'm not sure. He's been there all the way.
Tom and I have had words that, in the process of this, Tom and I have had words that are what they give out training manuals saying you should not do in a workplace.
I've lived in New York City for 30 years,
Yeah.
so...
And so I communicate to Tom like a New Yorker. That's right. What do you think you're doing here, Bubs?
That's more standard, but that's
We've had a good relationship, though, right there. Yes, right there.
This is my wife. She's the other half that keeps me sane to some extent.
Yeah.
As best she can.
Volunteers make this park go round. They do, and I won't mention any more volunteers because I'll leave somebody out. I would.
Yeah.
But we, occasionally, we get people like Tom. There's another lady that helps us out in the maintenance. I mean, they're basically equivalent to full-time employees. And the skill set that he brings to this, I mean, we could have never accomplished the transcription and the documentation of that's now available to you without somebody like Tom really willing to get in there and go through the weeds with it. It's something, it really is. And so we're very blessed to have him.
It's more like a swamp.
More like a swamp. There you go. More like a swamp. I guess y'all want me to talk about so my mother sends me a text at 1:09 and it's in big letters. Where do we tune in? Answer. And I bet there is 7 exclamation marks after my mother. My brother, my sister-in-law, bought her a new phone and she is using it to her heart's content. So what are we on now? YouTube? YouTube. All right. Chris says we need to get it going. All right. So we're gonna talk about the Ellet family and steamboats. Now, what I have for you, ladies and gentlemen, is
I think I've got a little bit of everything for you out here today. I've got physics. I've got history. I've got, is that too dark in the back? I think it should show up better. I've got geography. I've got adventure. I don't know. I've got stories about age. I've got stories about immaturity. I've got stories about indiscretion. And so I don't know what else I can put into this program that you might like. Now let's start in a place where everyone should be currently aware of. If you don't, you must be living in a bottle or something like that. If it works. Well, oops. Well, maybe it gave out on me. Let me look. That's all right. We'll make it work either way. Maybe we won't. All right. Why is this not working? I hate to tell you this, Chris, but I think it froze again. I think so. It's not queuing. It won't even let me out of it. I think a computer locked up. The worst thing that could happen, right? Al? All right. Now, well, I hate to reboot it. It should. I'm hitting escape. It's not viewing.
No, I don't think it's my fault. I don't think so.
Just talk over it.
All right.
We'll make it do. That's what 20 years in the Park Service does. I'll make this program happen either way. You may not understand the thing I'm talking about without a map on there, but you'll walk out here and say, he talked about something. Let's try it. All right. So we're talking about steamboats today. For y'all in the back, I got chairs up here. If you want it. You're fine, especially feel bad for the young lady standing up over there.
Thank you.
I seem to have a lot of Marines in the crowd today, or at least Marine veterans. I guess the Navy turns y'all out, right, for something like this. All right, so we'll catch back up with the slides in just a minute. The first thing I wish to cover, or the first slide was going to be, is the Ukraine. That's where we're going to start. And what's happening in the Ukraine right now? Right, everybody's got to know that. Well, a lot of you military history buffs are familiar, maybe not with the whole war, but at least with the name of the Crimean War. And you probably, because the news has not related any of this to you, the peninsula of Sevastopol is at the base of the Ukraine, and that is one of the regions that Russia had annexed before this war began. Now, if you go back in time, and there's a lot of layers of history to this, there was a siege at the port on that peninsula down there, the siege of Sevastopol. And it lasted from October of 1854 until September of 1855. The forces were the Allies, who were comprised of the French, Sardinia, Ottoman, and British. I didn't know there was a Sardinian army. And landed at Eupatoria. There you go. Chris Wynn, everybody. So this is where we're talking about. This is the modern day. You know this thing was going to go sideways as soon as Matt had a program right here. So there's Kiev up top. Obviously you can see Russia around to the right, or the top right there. And this is where we're talking about, this area down here. Okay, so you have the Allies on one side, and they land on the 14th of September of 1854, intending to make a triumphal march to Sevastopol, the capital of the Crimea, with 50,000 men. And they had 35 miles to march or to traverse, and it took a year of fighting to get to the city. Now, the Allies quickly got off to a quick start in their, y'all like how to say the Allies, a quick start in their campaign by defeating the Russian army at the Battle of Alma. And as a result, the Russian army beat it out of there, out of the peninsula, and left the defense of Sevastopol to the Russian Navy. And this is all working around to where we're coming as far as the Civil War. The first thing that the Russian Navy did was to scuttle their own ships, sink them, and before that, take the artillery off of all those ships and put them into their siege lines. And the Navy defended the city against the Allies. And that's where our story begins, right here. I don't know how much you can tell with all this movement going on, but here, out here is obviously going to be your ocean, the sea, and of course it comes in here, and here's the city itself, and here are the siege lines and the bastions that go around. So the fighting is taking place here. Now this is the story begins. An American named Charles Ellet Jr. was working for the Virginia Central Railroad, and the railroad dispatched him to Europe to study the rail system there. And while en route, he learned of the sinking of a 2,704-ton, 2,700-ton ocean liner in an accidental collision with a 250-ton ship. 2,700, 250 tons. That 250-ton ship sank that 2,700-ton vessel by accidentally doing what? Ramming it. And Charles Ellet is an engineer. I'm about to give you the background on him. He's a very smart individual, and he thought to himself, yes. And so what does he do? It greatly impressed him of the power and destructive effect of a steam vessel if used as a ram. Always a man of action. I wish you could still do this in the world. Can you imagine writing Vladimir Putin? He had no sooner set a foot in Europe when he learned that the Russians entertained the idea of sinking their own fleet. He at once wrote the Tsar and offered his services to outfit some of the Russian fleet as rams. Before any action came of it, though, the Tsar was assassinated. That's the problem. Okay? And nevertheless, Ellet took his idea home and was soon browbeating the United States Navy that ram technology was the thing of the future. And in the 1850s, when he got home, the Navy didn't want to have anything to do with him. That was just, So Ellet already had a distinguished resume. He was born in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. We got anybody from Bucks County today? So much for Bucks County. He worked on the C&O Canal as a teenager before leaving to study mathematics. And I'm not going to be able to do this. It's in French. École Nationale des Points S. I don't know what that word is. Chassis. That's Southern for you. Chassis in Paris. It's this big math school in Paris. That's what you need to know. And after traveling Europe, he worked as a surveyor in New York. In 1832, at the age of 22, he submitted a proposal for a suspension bridge across the Potomac. At 22. His design was rejected in part because of his age. In 1842, 10 years later, he designed and built the first wire cable suspension bridge in the United States. Wire cable suspension bridge, which spanned 358 feet over the Schuylkill, I should know that living here, River at Philadelphia. In 1848, which is what you see here, he built a record-breaking 1,000-foot suspension bridge at Wheeling, West Virginia. At age 32, spanned the Ohio River. The same year, he built a 770-foot span across the Niagara Gorge. In 1850, the Secretary of War contacted Ellet to study flood prevention and navigation improvement along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers. And his subsequent study was used to assist flood controls for decades, even after the Civil War. Now, getting into the Civil War itself, rams were catching up around the world, okay? And so the United States Navy, of course, is like the United States is right now. We're always slightly behind the curve in the government. Chris and I talk about how our technology, our media technology, lags a few years behind everything. When the Civil War kicks off, the South, the Confederate States of America, are what? An agricultural nation. They are not a seafaring nation. They're an agricultural. They're not even an industrial-based nation. They're seafaring. They need to get into the seafaring business. And what's the most expedient thing you can do in order to get into the seafaring business? Well, you got a lot of ships, but you don't have gunboats, but you have a lot of steamboats. And so the most easiest thing to do is to make rams out of them. The first famous ram, who would also be, of course, a warship, would be this thing right here. What ship is that?
Virginia?
That's the Virginia, the CSS Virginia or the USS Merrimack, if that's the one you want to, whichever one you want to call will suit me just fine right there. And what do you think this is? Right there. That prow which you see sitting out on the front. Folks, I've studied the Civil War my whole life. I don't know if I've learned anything from it, but I can tell you that that remember, you had to be the judge of that, but I never picked up on, as many times as I've read about the Merrimack and the Monitor, I never picked up on the CSS Virginia ram. Ram didn't mean anything to me. Okay, I didn't get the importance of that. And of course, that's the boat being fitted out. That's the boat underway. On March 8th of 1862, the CSS Virginia sails out to Hampton Roads and proceeds to put to an end, basically, the era of wooden gunboats by doing what? This. And in short order, they did what? The CSS Virginia sank the Cumberland and the Congress. Remember, the Monitor comes the next day. It's two separate engagements. Most people forget that. But the first day, the South comes out there and sinks everything that they can get at in that area. I did not know this. This is just some trivia for you Civil War buffs out there. But the Merrimack went out, since it was facing wooden ships and didn't know about the Monitor. It was loaded, as far as ordnance, it was loaded fully with explosive shells, not solid shot. So you have to wonder the next day when the Monitor and the Merrimack fought, what if they'd had solid shot, if they could have gotten through that armor of the Monitor. Equally interesting is the War Department, years after the Civil War, did I don't know what you call ballistics tests, for lack of a better word, and they doubled the amount of powder that the Monitor was using that day and fired it against the same type hull and armor that on the Virginia, except they doubled the powder charge, and those cannonballs went through it. So, rams had come about. And what do you think, going back to Charles Ellet, the first thing that happens after the Monitor and the Merrimack and that whole debacle is over with, is that Charles Ellet that same week is in the Department of the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. And Edwin Stanton wants Charles Ellet to get him some rams. And that's exactly how it proceeds. Now, in short order, he goes to Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, Charles Ellet that is, and he finds a bunch, but the primary ones are this. He finds 4 side-wheel steamers with enough power to handle the Mississippi River. These boats were the Queen of the West, the Monarch, the Switzerland, and the Lancaster. And for you trivia hunters right here, that's how you differentiated them on the river. See the letters? And then you got the Switzerland down here that's got the S that's painted on the side. But they're just regular steamers. But what would they do? They would go in there inside the hull and they would brace them up, reinforce them, if you will, throughout the boat. And then on the sharp edge, which you see right there, once they had that hull intact, with that reinforced, they would sometimes add light armor, or usually if they knew they were going in combat, they would put cotton bales on top of them as extra added. And it would stop a cannonball at least once, if not twice. But the main thing I need you to pick up on right now is that Ellet was called by the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton. He was not called by the Secretary of the Navy, who was on equal footing back then with that. It is the Army, not the Navy. Remember this, because it'll come back later in the story. This is the Army that's putting this ram fleet together, which answers to Edwin Stanton. So, Charles Ellet does not get a naval rank. He becomes a colonel in charge of a boat. And this is where the story starts with that. And they go on down the river to join the fleet. He enlisted, or Charles got his brother to come along, whose name is Alfred. We'll talk about him in a little while. He was a captain in the 59th Illinois Infantry. And Alfred's entire company, along with another from the 63rd Illinois Infantry, formed the nucleus of the crew for these steamboats. Infantry, not sailors. After adding pilots and engineers, the Rams rendezvous with the rest of the fleet at Fort Pellow, Tennessee, a short distance above Memphis. But not before. On won't go too deep into this, but not before, the day before they get there, a couple of days before they get there, the Confederate fleet who had fled out of New Orleans come all the way up to Memphis. Remember, they were rams. What happened at the Battle of New Orleans? The rams were actually they were private contractors. They were not Confederate Navy, and they were steamboat captains. So they went down there to face the United States Navy, who was a formal military organization at Fort Jackson, St. Philip, and they just got wiped out. The remnants go up to Memphis, and before these rams can get here, the Confederate rams left over from New Orleans come dashing up, and these Union ironclads are at Fort Pelham, and they come around the bend in a surprise attack. Before you know it, they've rammed a couple of these ironclads, because the ironclads can't do what? They're like a big truck with a lot of horsepower on it. You know, it's all what you need it for, like that bulldozer we were talking about a while ago. You know, you don't need a bulldozer when you're trying to win a race in a quarter, through the quarter. These steamboats are agile, so they get in, they're fast, they get in and out, kind of like a sports car, if you will. Well, they sank a couple of Union gunboats. And so now the Union Navy is adding the complement. The South, was what I'm telling you, has already beat them to there. So we get to this. A couple of weeks after Ellet and his rams arrive, on June 6th of 1862, the Battle of Memphis is fought. And you want to read about a lopsided engagement in the American Civil War. The Confederate fleet promptly goes out in their rams, and they get sunk. Opening up the battle is Charles Ellet, and what was the numbers here? He rushes ahead on the Queen of the West. And before anybody knows it, before there's any really major shots fired, he has rammed and sunk the first Confederate vessel. And after 2 hours, the Union victory was complete. Out of 8 Confederate rams at that battle, 7 of them were sunk, captured, or destroyed. Now, as you would know it, Ellet is going to be on the main deck directing the action. You know, these rams aren't armored, so he's just standing on the main deck directing, he's yelling at the other boats, etc. Well, these Confederate rams are not armed that well either, so what do they have on there? They have men with muskets, and they sweep the vessels. When they get close, they take pot shots at them. The only Union casualty of the Battle of Memphis is Charles Ellet, who catches a musket ball in the knee or right below it and refuses to have it treated. They wanted to amputate his limb. He refused to have it done. The infection set in. I don't think he was a stout, health-wise, was a stout man to begin with. And he dies. The only Union casualty of the Battle of Gettysburg. I'm kidding. Memphis, right here. Oh, y'all got to give me that one now. That's old hat right there, I'm going to tell you.
High water.
Yeah, it could be. Tom up here is just talking about the Battle of the High Water Mark. Reminded me of the visitor that came in one time and says, I just don't understand where the boats were. That's a valid question if you think about it. All right. So the ram fleet goes on down. This is the summer of 1862. Just keeping on the theme of rams right here. Well, the Confederates don't have that many rams, but when they make one, they try to make the best out of it. Before the city of Memphis falls, they've got a couple of ironclads that are in the rams, that are in the, what would you call it, dry docks of Memphis. And they destroy one of them. I forget what one. It was called Tennessee. I forget what the other one was called, but they take the Arkansas and they tow it because it's not ready. They tow it down to Vicksburg, and then subsequently tow it up the Yazoo River into the interior of Mississippi. Folks, this boat is built basically on the side of a cotton field. You talk about an agricultural nation trying to catch up with an industrial north, that's where it's going to be right here. And the South doesn't. There are no rolling mills in the South. There's only one steel rolling mill in the South, and that is Tredegar Iron Works. Might have been one in New Orleans, but they don't hold that anymore. They don't hold Nashville anymore. So they're automatically getting pinched by all this. So if you don't have a rolling mill, what does that mean? That means you can roll out sheets of iron and create armor with it. If you don't have that, you have to improvise. And so what do those old rednecks do? Well, they use the second best thing, railroad iron. Right? They stack railroad iron up on the top of it right here. Of course, the story of any Confederate ironclad, any Confederate vessel is the engines. You don't even have to read the rest of the story. It's always the engines. You can never get a good engine right there. But they built a lot of problems with this thing. They built the sides basically straight up and down. All right, and finished it. I mean, they had to fish the railroad iron out of the river. They start down through the Yazoo, and the Union fleet by now is outside of Vicksburg, Mississippi. The Queen in the West, a couple of the others, Ellet, go up the Yazoo to look for the Arkansas, and they find her coming back down. Well, a ram can't take on an ironclad. And the Arkansas sails right, just goes through them like butter, and emerges into the Union fleet on the Mississippi River. Well, the Union fleet, you probably never thought of this. The Union fleet doesn't have any steam up. Do you know how much tons of coal you would burn a day to keep those furnaces going? So they let the furnaces die down in order to conserve the coal. Well, you just don't fire a furnace up. This is not your car where you just go out there and crank it and just go wherever the heck you want to in life, you know. You got to build the fire, heat the water, and the water converts to steam, which gives you energy, gives you power on that thing. Well, they can't heat it up. They're just, and all these wooden masted vessels under Admiral Farragut are out there, and they can't move. You've got one ram that tries to get in front of the Arkansas, and these big bow guns, 64-pound bow guns, shell bow guns, they just quickly take out that ram by holding it through. But basically one of the Confederates said it was like sitting inside of a box with somebody with a sledgehammer on the outside. Can you imagine? Now, these are not pea shooter cannons like we have around here at Gettysburg. You're talking about naval guns. I'm talking about 100-pound balls on some of these, right? Can you imagine the energy force hitting the side of the Arkansas and rattling? And the Arkansas just shoot left and right. They don't even care because they can't miss. They got ships everywhere they turn. It's just one rolling volcano. They make it through that. The further they get in there, the more holes they get in the smokestack. And when you get holes in the smokestack, what does that do to you? That kills your draft, and if you don't have any draft, you can't get any oxygen in there to fire those to get the steam up. So what does your boat do? They just drift probably 1 or 2 knots, maybe 3 tops, getting hammered the entire time. Anyway, they pull up outside of Vicksburg, and hundreds of civilians come down to celebrate with them, and they quickly recoil because that whole thing is nothing but a bloody bucket inside there. Or a couple of Union shells that transport. But anyway, a ram. It just didn't have enough energy to ram anything, right? All right, so that's the Arkansas. We'll come back to that in just a second. So what are we doing here? The Union Navy has got a big problem right here. You're not going to be able to see this in the back, but where you see that red dot right there, let us orient you. This is, I believe, up here somewhere Memphis. I believe that's Memphis right there. I can't read it too well either. And this is the Mississippi River as it comes on down right here. And then you have Vicksburg right here. The Yazoo River, which I just talked about, is right here. See how it goes up in the interior? And this would be the Mississippi Delta. And down here would be Baton Rouge at the bottom of the river, Natchez, Mississippi, and Vicksburg. So the Confederates are trying to find high and dry ground. The Union is trying to find high and dry ground behind Vicksburg. In other words, logistics. How do you get at Vicksburg? Where do you land 30,000, 40,000 men and be able to come in there and resupply them? You just can't land in a swamp. If you would like to read about doing that, go to the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, and you see how that turned out for the Union in December of '62, right above Vicksburg. So they're searching. So the whole thing is, Vicksburg campaign, naval-wise, is predicated on finding this dry ground. This is the Yazoo Pass expedition. See how they're trying to come in behind Vicksburg? Like this. You got Steele's Bayou, which is this dark blue right here. They're trying once again to come in behind Vicksburg. And they're unsuccessful. More about that in just a minute. Now the Confederates, for their part, what you need to know about what these rams are going to be taking place in, they've got 60,000 men between Vicksburg, Mississippi, and Port Hudson, Louisiana. 60,000 men. They are stationary. They are garrison troops for the most part. Think about it, ladies and gentlemen. How many tons of supplies would that consume a day in order to feed and whatever else 60,000 men? You are talking about a lot of supplies. You need a lot of stuff coming in. And so therefore, it becomes beholden to the Confederates that after Memphis falls and Baton Rouge falls, that they need to control the Mississippi between Vicksburg, Mississippi and Port Hudson, Louisiana. They want to control this area right here. And this is all I'm about to talk to you about for the next 30 minutes right here, all right? Is these 2 points. The Union Navy, therefore, wants to choke off the supplies coming in to Mississippi from Louisiana and Texas. That's what they're trying to do. So it behooves the Confederates to put cannons on the bluffs of Vicksburg and down here on the bluffs of Port Hudson and try to keep the Union Navy from between these 2 points. So the Red River, which is where my red dot is, no pun intended, the Red River right here, all these supplies can get down from the heart of Louisiana and Texas and therefore to these garrisons. That's the big picture, logistically speaking. Now here's how the Rams get involved. They want to blockade the Union Navy. Union forces want to blockade the Red River. So they got to get past Vicksburg because the fleet is up above it. All right, so I told you that Charles Ellet had passed away. And so his brother, Alfred, now held command of the newly minted created Mississippi Marine Brigade. I don't know if the nice Marine Corps person is still back there, but the Mississippi Marine Brigade is not related to the United States Marine. Not to be mistaken for that. But they were, since Alfred was in command of the Mississippi Marine Brigade, he was unavailable. But the Ellets kept producing men for the Union war effort. And so who do they turn to? If you can't have Charles Ellet Jr., then you can go with Charles Rivers Ellet, who is the son of Charles Rivers Jr., Charles Ellet Jr. All right, I'm going to get mixed up. There's 2 Charles. I call them Old Charles and Young Charles. Now this is young Charles. So when I say Charles Ellet, I mean young Charles from now on, in case I'm not clear on that. Ladies and gentlemen, he is 19 years old. 19 years old. And the United States military needs somebody to run some rams past the guns here at Vicksburg, who's crazy enough to try to do it along the bluffs and try to get down and blockade the mouth of the Red River where it flows into the Mississippi River. And this guy steps up. Like his father, young Charles showed a sharp mind, having enrolled at Georgetown College in preparatory classes at age 14. You'll like this one, Tom. His precocity
his precocity of intellect. I forgot about this thing. His precocity of intellect and highly sensitive nature made him alike the cause of pride and of anxiety to his parents. I like this. Half the reason you're getting this show today is because I can relate to Charles Rivers Ellet. 2 years later, he enrolled at the Virginia Military Institute, but only stayed a short time before a prank apparently caused his expulsion. Now, the other day, I was going down the road and I was trying to tell my 13-year-old boy about that and about what I was talking about. And I said, well, he had a hard time with authority, Ben. And he goes, yeah. I said, he got thrown out of VMI when he was 16. And Ben turns to me and he goes, Daddy, have you ever been thrown out of anything? Which I ignored, as a good parent would. I ignored the question until he repeated it right there, because I was, my kids had to always ask me twice. And I turned to Ben and I said, on what level would you like to educational, physical habitation, entertainment venues, or appreciation dinners? Daddy, I can't imagine you doing anything like that. Now, Charles Ellet subsequently went back to Georgetown College and began to study medicine in earnest. This guy's going to be a doctor. First Battle of Manassas occurs in 1861, and he's a medic. Not a doctor, but he's a medic. He goes out and assists the doctors with it, but he quickly joins his father's command of the Ram fleet and becomes second in command. The young 19-year-old commanded the Ram Switzerland at the Battle of Memphis, and he and his cousin, Edward Ellet, rowed ashore after the battle, and despite the presence of a mob, coolly walked to the old United States Post Office building to raise the American flag. Do you want me under the picture?
Yeah, please.
All right.
Thank you.
The citizen mob promptly barricaded the two inside the building for several hours, but they survived without a scratch. I don't see why I would be worried about anything at all, personally. The whole thing must be a misunderstanding.
I didn't mean literally, I just wanted you to keep talking.
Now Charles Ellet, after Memphis, holds a colonel's commission in command of a fleet, 19 years old. On February 1st, this is Vicksburg, Mississippi, Admiral Porter ordered the young commander to proceed downriver to interdict shipping on the Red River. As if his task wasn't Herculean enough, he was to strike the steamer. This is the name of the steamer, okay? Don't get confused. The name of the steamer was City of Vicksburg. And it was now moored in front of the city in his passage of the battery. Young Ellet prepared for the gauntlet by packing his ram down with 250 bales of cotton. And they would wet them down, which I would hate to know how heavy that made them. By now, the rams carried light cannon, and Ellet ordered them shotted with tow balls soaked in turpentine in order to be fired. So they go on down the river, and this is an artist's rendition of that. You can see cotton bales packed on it right here. And he rams it right in front of the city of Vicksburg. And you don't think those Confederates were angry about that? They fired, one reporter counted 120 shots fired at the Queen of the West in this passage. It would take a vessel going downstream, not against the current, going downstream. It took about 30 minutes to get past Vicksburg, the front of Vicksburg. And to go back a slide right here, look at that hairpin turn. See how they turn? You come up here, and there will be Confederate guns all the way down, right through here. I'm not saying hub to hub, but you would have various Confederate batteries lining those bluffs right there of heavy guns.
Very hard to hit. So he does it, and he's able to get through there. He strikes the city of Vicksburg, and it basically is put out of service. Now remember this story because I'll come back to it later. Now going back to our discussion on Confederate supplies coming from the Trans-Mississippi to the east, Ellet promptly captured one steamer once he got past Vicksburg, while another, now listen to this, now put this into mind because they're just numbers, but put this into mind for 1 second. The second steamer he captured yielded 110,000 pounds of pork. You a pork man?
Yeah.
The more these meat prices go up, I'm a pork man myself too, I guarantee you.
Especially bacon.
Well, I got that too. Not only did they get 110,000 pounds of pork, they captured 500 hogs on there. 500 hogs. Okay? He destroyed another 25,000 pounds of cornmeal that he found on shore. Now, do you know how much cornbread that made? The Southerner just can't handle that. You know, man, it hurts right here. While another captured steamer yielded 200 barrels of molasses, 10 hog sheds of sugar, and 30,000 pounds of flour, all within 24 hours of him reaching the Red River, the mouth of the Red River. Now you think about how much he didn't catch. Do you see how many tons of supplies are coming out of west of the Mississippi River for the Confederacy? And that's just a drop in the bucket right there. But to go back to those 500 hogs and 110,000 pounds of meat, I thought that Joe Johnson burning 1,000,000 pounds of bacon outside of Manassas in 1862 was horrible enough. Oh, it broke my heart. Now, Southern man, I'll tell you right now. What you have right here, the whole hog. Now, I don't generally go up here. But I've done about everything back here. There you go.
What about feet?
You know, people ask me about eating those feet.
Never touched them myself.
Oh, no, I don't know. They say they taste pork rinds. I'm not a big fan of the pork rinds either. I did say before, this is obviously meant as a joke, but and I'm being dead serious when I say this, Ellet promptly sunk that steamer, the transport, the supply steamer. And it doesn't say this in the history books, but I guess those 500 hogs drowned when he sank that vessel. I guess they did. That just hurts right there. That's a lot of barbecue, to say the least, especially for starving men. Anyway, going back to where we are, he comes down here to the Red River. He spends a couple days, and then he goes all the way back up to Vicksburg, right here is Vicksburg, and from the Red River, and he's resupplied with coal, and then he comes back down. Now this is where we get to giving a 19-year-old a steamboat. Now you think about it, my parents made a grave mistake buying me a nice car when I was in high school. They did. Now this steamer right here is probably, I could look it up, but let's say we're probably around 250 tons on the steamer. And this thing's fast. It'd be like buying a kid a Corvette. I didn't get a Corvette. I got a Dodge Colt. But, almost the same. But, fewer cylinders. But, what does Ellet do at 19 years old? His orders are to remain at the mouth of the Red River. Well, the first thing he does is go up the, I'm going to slaughter this one, Atchafalaya River. And they're just cruising down the river, kind of like, Apocalypse Now, everything's going fine, they're just skiing real fine. I'm just kidding. But they're relaxed. They let their guard down. And you know what's about to happen. Bushwhackers start plinking at him from the shore. And a couple of his sailors get hurt. And he punches it, hauls tail out of there. And the next day he comes back. He had time to think about it overnight. Can you imagine answering to a 19-year-old kid if you're on the crew? And he went right back up there. And he got a detachment off his boat and he sent them ashore. And the 3 nearest plantations that he found, he burned to the ground. He did. The last one he came to tell this story, because I want you to picture this being your house right here, and this happened to you. Upon inquiry at the house, one of the daughters readily admitted that her brother was part of the ambuscade and, quote, and only wished the one that had not, and regretted that only one had participated and had not been a dozen. She abused the colonel and berated the Yankees. Feisty little thing. Ellet ordered his men to set fire to the house and outbuildings, with the flames consuming her home. The plucky girl began to sing, quote, in a ringing, defiant tone, the Bonnie Blue Flag. And the forest and river echoed and re-echoed with the sweet melody, along with the cracks of the flame. Burned her house. Well, what does Ellet do? He's supposed to be at the mouth of the Red River. He gets word that the Confederates are constructing a battery a couple miles up inland on the Red River. And what does young Ellet do? He proceeds to take the Queen of the West, that ram which he's aboard, right on up the Red River. And when they get right to the last turn before that Confederate fort, he's sneaking, he just wants to put his bow around there and look around, see what's happening. Is there really guns over there? The pilot, which is basically driving his vessel right there, runs the Queen ashore, runs it aground. And guess what? Those Confederates do have a battery there. They have a couple 32-pound cannons. And they really, really, really like stationary targets. And so with the Queen of the West having been run ashore or run aground, they start holding the Queen. And soon enough, those 32-pound balls come through there and they sever the steam pipes. And once the steam starts going through these vessels, these boats right here, you got problems. Because that steam will kill you. This is not where you're shower. You need to jack the temperature up to lethal. And they have to get off this vessel. Well, guess what young Ellet had done? Remember when he got ambushed the day before? The one guy that was wounded on his vessel, he did not have removed before he went up to see if that battery was there. And so they're trying to get everybody off that vessel. And he's got a man that can't be moved, who's too gravely wounded to be moved. He needs to destroy the Queen of the West, and he can't do it without burning the man up, the wounded man up. And so the Queen is captured. They get away. The crew gets in the yawls, they float down on cotton bales, they swim, they do everything they can. They don't capture that many of them, including Ellet. But the Confederates get that ram. And it's not sunk. It's just damaged. And the Confederates may be a bunch of rednecks from an agricultural nation, but they got people that can solder copper, believe me. And they can repair a steam pipe. And so what do? They tow that Queen right on up the Red River and they start working on her. They just captured the whole thing. Now, Ellet and his crew drift on down in these yawls, which you see right there. They get on board a tugboat, which had accompanied them down. The tugboat, if this story could get any worse, the tugboat runs aground. It knocks the rudder loose. The tugboat becomes inoperable. They abandon the tugboat. They sink that thing. They get into one of the transport steamers that he captured earlier, and they set sail up the Mississippi River. They're going up toward Vicksburg as fast as he can get there, and suddenly they see smoke coming from several miles away, down toward them from Vicksburg. If you're Ellet and you're trying to escape, you're thinking what? oh my God, the Confederates are coming with reinforcements. I cannot express to you wholeheartedly what a great joy it probably was when that smoke turned out to be the USS Indianola, who had run the batteries too a few days later at Vicksburg, and had come down to join Ellet in the blockade of the Red River. Let me see. She had 3-inch iron plating with an overall length of 175 feet and a beam of 50 feet. If you're taking all that in, and her draft was only 5 feet with that long a boat and that much armor on her. 511 tons with a 5-foot draft on it. You could put that in a good creek if you needed to, if it fit. Now you see how the Union Navy's getting into the interior of Mississippi. The 511-ton vessel possessed an unusual dual propulsion system with both side paddle wheels and twin screws. That means they got some under the water and a paddle wheel above the water. So they got 2 things they can propel this boat with. It's revolutionary. I don't know which one would be more fuel efficient. The ironclad mounted 4 guns, 2 11-inch Dahlgrens on the front and 2 9-inch Dahlgrens on the back. The larger 11-inch guns were mounted on pivots and positioned in the forward casemate, while the smaller 9-inch fired through conventional portholes from the rear casemate. The main weakness of the vessel lay in the positioning of the guns, which limited fire to the fore and the aft. Folks, I have learned so much about the Navy researching this program. I will be very happy to get back on land. Porter chose the powerful vessel because she could stem the tide. That means go against it, the current, but only at 2 knots. If you went north back to Vicksburg, you'd be doing 2 knots wide open, which is not very fast. Lieutenant Commander George Brown commanded the Indianola, and Porter cautioned him before leaving, when you have not means of certain success, undertake nothing. A failure is equal to defeat. Well, anyway, long story short, the Indianola joins up with the remnants of Ellet's crew from the Queen of the West, and they turn back around. They go back down to the Red River. Now he's got an ironclad. Ellet stays a couple days, then he decides to depart for Vicksburg to go report back, and that left the Indianola by itself. Well, the Confederates had not been idle. I told you they had the Queen, and they were repairing her. Well, they got her repaired, and they joined the Queen with another ram named the CSS Webb. And they, along with a couple of transport vessels filled basically with Confederate infantry, a bunch of renegades, if you will, these 4 vessels set off in pursuit of Ellet. And they had heard that the Indianola was there, and they caught up with them. They caught up with these vessels. Now, the Confederates in Louisiana do not have a navy. So if you don't have a navy, what do? Well, the guy in charge right here is a gentleman by the name of Richard Taylor. Well, I'm testing your Civil War knowledge right there. How about Stonewall Jackson? How about the Battle of Port Republic? Anybody? Oh, come on now. Y'all got to get to reading. Dick Taylor is transferred to the Trans-Mississippi, and he's in charge of that overall department. Well, he doesn't have a navy. So if you don't have a navy, what do? You turn to your Chief of Artillery and Ordnance, Major Brent, right over here. And that's who you put in charge of the Confederate Navy on the Red River. And Brent is the one that organizes the pursuit that's coming on for the Indianola. He doesn't know what he's doing, but he does it. Taylor would write, to attempt the destruction of such a vessel as the Indianola with their limited means seemed madness, yet volunteers for the work promptly offered themselves. Brent assembled his flotilla consisting of 655-ton Webb. All right? And augmenting that with the captured Queen of the West. And of course, they are pursuing what we've already covered, the Indianola. On February 24th, he caught up with the Indianola. How did he do that? The Indianola is towing 2 bargefuls of coal, which is impeding them. And probably they're only doing a half a knot. But Brown, the commander, doesn't want to burn and sink the coal. Why? Because he's expecting reinforcements from Vicksburg. And if reinforcements come, they're going to need coal. So if you sink the coal, you got no fuel. And the Confederates catch him. Now, Brent is thinking, he may not be a Navy man, but he's thinking, I don't want to take this Indianola on in broad daylight. So he waits till darkness to catch up with them. He knew where both of them knew where they were. And about an hour before he caught him, Brown had the Indianola turned. Instead of heading north, he had the Indianola turned south, bows on, if you will, downstream. And he cleared the deck for action. And here come the Webb and the Queen of the West, now a Confederate ship under Confederate command. And I could spend another 30 minutes on this. But long story short, the Queen of the West comes up in there, and the first blow they come through there severs one of the coal barges off the side, but it absorbs the blow. The Webb follows behind the Queen and hits the other coal barge on the other side. And then the Queen, which is backed around, comes in and hits it. About midways through there, puts a dent inside it. Well, now it's starting to leak a little bit. The engines aren't quite working good on the Indianola. The Indianola's Brown's trying to turn the Indianola to face because his guns, he can't shoot if the Confederates are beside him. If they're behind him or in front of him, he can shoot, but he can't hit them. And so they use the word torpid. Its movements, the Indianola's movements were torpid, and he tries to turn it, but he doesn't get it turned, and the Queen comes back again and delivers the coup de grace to it. At one time, the Webb hits it again. If you can imagine, the Webb, who was, 650 tons, hits head on before all this happens, literally head on with the Indianola with a 511-ton ironclad. 650-ton ram and a 511-ton ironclad hit bow on. Wide open. It said the collision knocked everybody on both sides to the deck. There's that much, if you can imagine that much energy, and it left the bow of the Webb gone. It disintegrated the ram portion of it, and there was a foot left between the water line and the bow. It was completely gone. These are, they're literally ramming. But those rams took out that ironclad and captured it. Right before it's sinking, those transport ships with those infantry pulled alongside, and they're getting ready to jump on the Indianola. I can't imagine this happening, but the commander of the Indianola gets up on the deck, and the Confederates, they're right across from each other. He says, "Do you surrender?" "I surrender, sir." And the guy jumps on the deck, receives the sword, and everybody. It's all very orderly, in the midst of chaos. But the Confederates, ladies and gentlemen, now have captured a ram, and now they've got an ironclad. Game changer. Hello, we got boats too now. What do you have? We've got your ironclad. And the next day, you know what happens? Admiral Porter up above Vicksburg, he doesn't know what happened. They don't have anything like that. They don't have anything like cell phones to call, tell you what to do. He's looking downstream through his binoculars, and the vessel that he sent down a couple of weeks ago, the Queen of the West, pulls up to Vicksburg to the wharf flying the Confederate flag. They put a big old flag out on the top of it just so the United States Navy could see it, from a distance right there. And Porter knew right then that something had happened to the Indianola and obviously the Queen, because he could see that. Indianola being sunk, though. The Confederates are working on it, though. They're working on it. And that's that. Porter would write, "There is no use to conceal the fact that this has been the most humiliating affair that has occurred during this rebellion." Porter reported to Washington, "I certainly had a right to expect that 2 vessels carrying 12 guns that have passed all the batteries could manage them between them to take one old steamer. I like Porter, no salt dog. Porter's is in deep water. Whether he's not directly responsible for it, he had nothing to do with Ellet disobeying orders and going up the Red River, etc. But buck stops here, and he's in disfavor. Now, ordinary people would probably buckle under such a thing. Oh, woe unto me. But Porter, this is the great thing about Grant. If you ever study the Vicksburg campaign, for a small 30-second tangent right here, you look at the joint operations, is what modern military would call it, between the Navy and the Army. There is no MacArthur. There is no Eisenhower. There is no supreme commander. Each branch is independent of the other. And watch how they work in tandem. It's beautiful to watch. Grant and Porter work as a team, while on the Confederate side, the Confederates are disjointed. The west of the Mississippi and the east of the Mississippi do not pull in tandem, and it cost them. So Porter's got to do something. Well, he had noticed, or he thought, whether this is true or not, that when he sent the vessels past Vicksburg, that the Confederates had blown up or dismounted several of their cannons as a result, because they're just not, for whatever reason, they just won't take the stress on them. So Porter came up with an idea to fix up an old barge. He went to a local plantation, he borrowed the outhouse, and he put it on top as the pilot house, and then he put barrels on top of each other and as the smokestacks, and took bowls full or barrels full of burning pitch or tar and set them on fire inside that barge. So the black smoke from that tar lifts up through the barrel smokestack, and it looks like what? It looks like coal fire. That black smoke coming from coal is actually tar right there. They completed it with a couple of other items, but hastily thrown together. But the main thing you need to know is they set it adrift at night. And what Porter is trying to do is to get the rebels to dismount some or blow up some of their other guns firing at this thing, which is not really a real vessel. Well, they set it, he sets it adrift, and the Confederates fall for it. Boom, 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 the guns start going off, and they shoot everything they have, and still the vessel keeps on going. The Black Terror, as it will. It, of course, nobody's on board to guide it. It grounds itself opposite of Vicksburg, and the soldiers are like, that are on picket duty are like, whoa, they didn't know it was coming. So they get orders, they get a couple of sticks, long sticks, and they push it out away from the shore and get it back into the current where it goes on down. Well, I already told you, you're never going to believe this. This all has a point, because you're never going to believe this, all right? But the Queen of the West, the Confederate vessel now, is at the Vicksburg docks. We're close to it. And they see this vessel coming. Well, doesn't it make sense to you, ladies and gentlemen, if the United States Navy would try to get back down there and right the situation? It makes perfect sense if you think about the United States Navy be trying to do this. So before they can verify what this actual vessel is, the Queen of the West turns around and is headed south as fast as that fast boat will go, spreading the alarm everywhere that the Union Navy has a vessel coming downriver. And they stop, and eventually they get to the USS Indianola. Remember, that thing was sunk. And everybody, I mean, they're flying. Everybody that's anybody gets on board the vessel, and they leave the shaved-tail lieutenant and about a dozen men on charge of the Indianola, and it gets dark that night. And every little creek along the swamp and in the Mississippi, etc., they're like, oh, that's got to be it. You know, the Union Navy's always right around the bend. That night, around midnight, you're never going to believe this, that lieutenant decided that the Union Navy was almost there, and he blew up the Indianola. blew it up. Do you know how rare it is for the Confederates to get a double paddle wheel, twin screw, 511 tons, 4 Dahlgren ironclad that can do 2 knots against the current? I mean, what more do you want?
They stole this.
And they scuttled it. He blew it sky high. And that was the end of it. And so, ladies and gentlemen, for $8.61 is what it cost the American taxpayer, David Dixon Porter managed to get rid of the USS Indianola for $8.61. Now, Porter never told Washington that he didn't intend to do that. But it worked beautifully. And the Confederates were greatly chagrined, to say the least. Now, meanwhile, getting toward the end here, you got New Orleans right here, the same map, except it's a different map. You got Vicksburg right here. You got Port Hudson right here. Here's the width of the river that the Confederates control right here. The Red River will be flowing into the Mississippi approximately right here in this area. To the south, down here in New Orleans, Admiral Farragut, you got David Dixon Porter up above Vicksburg. You got Farragut down here below Vicksburg. He hears what's happened to the Indianola and the Queen, and he decides to run the guns past Port Hudson with the Southern fleet and therefore interdict the Red River himself. This is when he runs the guns at Port Hudson. That is the loss of the USS Mississippi, a vessel that, if you want to see a pedigree of peacetime, maritime, U.S. naval power, look up the history of the USS Mississippi. That was the last of her. That was Admiral Dewey on board. But anyway, only out of his whole fleet, only 2 vessels managed to make their way past Port Hudson, and eventually they come up to make their way up to south of Vicksburg, and they pass the Indianola and etc. And they see it's sunk when they tell Porter. So everybody's getting real happy around here. Well, they get up south of Vicksburg. I got one more story for you. They get up south of Vicksburg and they request recoaling because they're out of fuel. Well, Grant sends them a barge full of coal down, not Porter, because Porter, ladies and gentlemen, is not there physically. Porter is up in the interior of Mississippi in March of '63, literally in a swamp in Mississippi called Steele's Bayou. It's either called Deer Creek or Steele's Bayou. I just wrote 6,000 words on this thing a couple of months ago. And I'm thoroughly familiar with that swamp right here. But Porter is physically here, Farragut is physically here, and there's no way to rapidly communicate between the two. I mean, you'd have to go around the bay in order to get there. Well, Farragut wants to get back down the Red River. And he doesn't like, he's got his slope, the Hartford, and he's got the Albatross, a little smaller gunboat with him. Well, he wants more firepower, and he requests an ironclad and a couple of rams to be run down to join his makeshift fleet below Vicksburg. Well, Porter's not there. And the guy in charge, Henry Walk, is like, I don't know, the boss man's not here. I don't know, if we send that vessel down there, there's no way to get him back. I don't know about that. I'm going to have to decline. We're not sending an ironclad. Well, guess who's sitting over on the corner? The Ellets. And the Ellets are not with the United States Navy. They're with who? They're with the Army. And so when Alfred Ellet, who was a brigadier general, not a captain in the Navy, when he receives word that Admiral Farragut needs vessels below, he says, okay, I'll do it. Now, oh Lord, you wanted to see one of the rich moments in American history. You should have been there when David Porter come out of that swamp, found out what's about to happen. I bet he'd sail the creases out of there, to say the least. The Ellets decide they're going to run this thing. There's Alfred right there. And he orders Charles, young Charles. He orders young Charles in order to get ready to go. And so guess what that is? 2 more rams. The Switzerland and the Lancaster. I don't have a picture of the Lancaster. I don't know if it's Lancaster. Where I'm from, it's Lancaster. But Lancaster up here in Pennsylvania, I've gotten so used to it, I don't think about it anymore. But the Switzerland's right here, and this is one of the rams, and this is the one that Charles will run. Well, his cousin, John, is going to command the Lancaster. And so here they go. They get up to the bend right here, and they get ready to run down. You got to remember, Charles had just run it the month before. Now, they spent all night. This is on the evening of March 24th and 25th. They spent all night loading these two rams up with provisions and getting them ready to run. And by the time they got here, the vessels pulled up to the launch point to run the gauntlet. It's around 4:35 in the morning. It's getting about daylight. You can probably see the shadows starting to come up. Now, the prudent thing, ladies and gentlemen, will be to wait 24 hours. Not a 19-year-old. All right? He's in charge of these two rams. And as sunlight starts to come over the horizon over here, or it'd be over here, or over there too. I can hear Chris right now. You need to focus, man. You're running behind time. You need to focus. He goes for 160 pounds of steam up on those vessels. We talked about steam being down. That's the max load on it. My daddy used to have a boiler that we fired the dry kilns with, and that's about all she'd take. You know, ours had safety valves on it. And I doubt those steamboats, they had safety valves, but I bet they had them tied down at the time. But they had we'd run about 120, 130 pounds, which is hard to maintain. He's running 160 pounds on there. And he goes for it with the sun coming up. And I bet those Rebs sitting up on those Vicksburg bluffs were like, he's really going to do this. But by this time, they are really getting ticked off about these Union gunboats coming back. And what are they doing? They've gotten more and more practice. And the more times you give somebody practice, the more efficient they should become. And instantly, when they turn right there, he is wide open as they come down through here, the Switzerland being in front. Quote, this is from Charles Ellet, "The rebels opened fire at once, but the first 15 or 20 shots were badly aimed." Well, that's nice. "As we got near to the guns, however, the fire became both accurate and rapid. Shot after shot struck my boat, tearing everything to pieces before them. A few hundred yards behind us, the Lancaster, under command of Lieutenant Colonel John A. Ellet, still steamed steadily down." Can you imagine this right here? "But I could see the splinters fly from her at every discharge. Soon," this is the end of quote, "soon a 10-inch shell found its mark and pierced the boiler. Quote, the explosion of steam which ensued was very severe and was welcomed by the traitors with shouts of exultation." They could hear them on the bluffs cheering. "The engineers stopped at once, and even the pilot house was filled to suffocation with the hot steam. But the pilots stood to their posts like men and floated down with the current. The steam had barely," end of quote, "the steam had barely cleared away when Ellet looked behind just in time to see the Lancaster explode. She sank rapidly, bow first." They got off in the yawls. And do you believe out of that whole thing that only one man was killed? The guy that tried to swim ashore. Always is. When I used to be at Vicksburg, ladies and gentlemen, it wouldn't happen every week, didn't happen every month. But you know, about once a year, we'd have one of y'all northern people go down to the dang casino. Y'all had too much to drink. Y'all decided when you came out you could swim that river. Well, that ain't how that works. Especially with a current that fast. They usually find you down at the Grand Gulf Electrical Plant maybe about a week later, where you would tear it out. It's probably where they found that sailor, too. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland goes on down. They repair the damage, and it goes on down and joins Farragut, etc. The Ellets come back up. That they had gotten into, Porter had gotten into a row about command and control. He really wanted command of those rams. And when he got back from the Steele's Bayou expedition, as I said earlier, he's fit to trot. He wanted to know, first sentence of the letter he wrote Alfred Ellet was, by whose authority did you send those rams downstream unprepared? And he wrote John, who's down there, and he says, you will not do anything. You won't even basically sneeze unless Admiral Farragut tells you to. And he writes Farragut saying, don't you let them Ellets out of your sight. Because they're steaming up and down the Mississippi, just causing havoc right here. They get it straightened out. It's never resolved over who commands it. But Alfred Ellet and Porter get in their cabin. And I don't know what was spoken there, but I wouldn't say it was harmonious, and I wouldn't say it was tight, and I wouldn't say it was the best. But whatever was said in that cabin, they made it work. They came out with a compromise. And the Ellets and the Ram fleet served for the rest of the Vicksburg campaign. You look back, in conclusion, you look back on this, ladies and gentlemen, the power of rams, the power of physics, if you will, it's a game changer. With today's firepower, of course, rams are obsolete because the vessel could never get close enough to try that again. It still worked, though, if you could do that. Well, I say not, you know. You think about those speedboats. What was the name of the vessel? The speedboat came up in Cole. The Cole. The USS Cole. What year was that?
2000 or something. 98, 99, 2000.
That was 2000.
It's not a ram, but if you can get close enough, you can cause a lot of damage right there. Rams in the United States Civil War were a game changer. It allowed an undermanned, underfunded Confederate States of America to hang in there. I wouldn't say they ever went toe-to-toe with the United States Navy, but the threat of these rams were always there, even up to the Battle of Mobile Bay in 1864, Charleston, etc. There's always a ram around that might be there. So I think it's something that is worth looking into further, because I've left a lot out of this story and trying to pack it all in. I want to say one last thing about Charles Rivers Ellet. You know, I told you that I related to him in a lot of different ways, and talking about age and maturity and so forth. At 16 I wasn't, or 14 I wasn't at the National School of Mathematics in Paris, and at 16 I wasn't at VMI. In fact, they didn't even invite me. But I had pulled a few pranks, and I like anyway, a lot of memories came flooding back from that era as I studied it. Charles makes it all the way through the Vicksburg campaign, and in August of 1863, he's granted medical leave to go home. And, quote, he retired to the home of his uncle in Illinois. Now, you think about what this kid's been through. All the adventures and high tense situations and so forth. Apparently, he suffered from a, quote, severe facial neuralgia, and for which he was in the habit of self-medicating over such a thing. Now, self-medication is something that I'm familiar with. He goes to Bunker Hill, Illinois, ladies and gentlemen. He's 20 years old and 5 months at this time. He goes up to his uncle's house in Bunker Hill, Illinois. He has this headache, apparently. He goes in the back, He was used to, quote unquote, not through a doctor, but through himself preparing his own medication, self-medicating right there. And Ben and I, to go back to my 13-year-old, we're talking about that. We've been having the lectures the other day about I'm trying to keep him at least not to act like half like I did, you know. Please, Lord. And I got to telling him this story right here. And I said to him, Ben, what ends up happening to Charles Rivers Ellet is the problem with you doing any of this. That feeling which Charles River Ellet got used to is not meant to be normal. It can't be normal. And you can't maintain something like that. There is no way to control something as powerful as morphine. Charles River Ellet went in his bedroom, ladies and gentlemen. He self-medicated, and he didn't come out. Can you imagine escaping with your life all those high adventures, no pun intended, on the Mississippi River, to get all the way through, ladies and gentlemen, to the end, and to accidentally kill yourself in such a grand fashion? Now, this story, especially in the opioid crisis we went through a few years ago, etc. Everybody probably knows somebody there, and the story is always the same, no matter whatever era it is. You always wonder what might have been. What Charles River Ellet, if he would have survived, what service he could have done to the United States of America, and what service he could have done for the country in its aftermath with the brilliance that he had. Quote, this is describing him, no reward awaits him on earth, but the love of friends and the veneration of his countrymen will enshrine his memory in all the records of romance, and more truly chivalric spirit can nowhere be found in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ellet family and Ram Power on the Mississippi. Thank y'all very much.